Hello there and welcome to our business letter writing program. This is a major topic and one that I hope you will gain a lot of information from as we go through the program. Nobody really wants to write letters. It's the last thing that we really want to do. And it would really be better if we had somebody else to write them for us. Is that true? I'm sure you're thinking along those lines as well. It takes time out of your busy schedule to sit down and write your letters. And for some of you, it may be a little bit more difficult than it is for other people. This is why in business it's important that you have very good communication skills. If you are a manager or if you are an executive, it's necessary that you are to communicate not only in a verbal capacity and not only using your tone and your body language as we have discussed in our communications program, but it is important that you are also able to write very good and business-like letters. It's important also that you are just able to write well and to be able to convey your message. Some people have greater skills than others at this. And if you feel that you are lacking in certain areas regarding your written business skills, then just go through this program at a steady pace and see how you can improve upon your skills. I myself, I don't like writing letters, but I know that I have to sit down and really spend a bit of time thinking them through, constructing them, and then getting on with them and getting them out to my customers or to prospective clients, etc. So let's go through this together and see how we can help you improve upon your abilities in writing business letters. We really do need to think about the purpose of your letter. Before you begin rushing in to write and sending off letters, it is important that you take some time to think about the purpose of your letter. When we talk about business letters in particular, business letters are really a way of communicating between two or more parties. Remember, you're not just writing to one person. It could be many that are going to be receiving your letter. And because it's business writing or business communication, it's quite formal. You do have to realize that there are rules to follow. There are guidelines that are going to help you along your way. And these guidelines will reflect how professional you are and how professional not only you but your company is in communicating to the other party. There are many, many different uses and different kinds of business letters. There are standard types of letters, and we'll go through these in the program. But there are many adaptations to the standard type of business letter. So it will be up to you to define your purpose of your letter. This is very, very important right in the beginning. Business letters also can be informational. They can be persuasive. They can be motivational. And they can be promotional. There are varying purposes to business letters. And as we go through the program, you'll get to understand exactly what kind of letter you want to write and what the objective is of writing that letter. If you have a clear objective in your mind, then that is going to make the process much easier. So remember, you have to decide, are you wanting to give a lot of information in your letter? Do you need to send details and data in your letter about a certain event or a certain subject or a certain product or person? Does your letter have to be persuasive in that you want to try to convince the other party to perhaps follow a line of your products or to change their system, etc.? Does your letter have to be persuasive? Does your letter have to be motivational? Are you trying to instill some enthusiasm or interest or excitement in the other party so that something can be achieved together? Maybe that's what your purpose of your letter is. Or is it a letter that is promotional, meaning that you're going to be promoting a service you have or a program you have or a new kind of product, etc. And therefore, the tone and the contents of your letter in either of these 4 types of letters will be different. So we can see informational, persuasive, motivational, or promotional. What will it be? In order to write a good letter, and here we say, what is a good letter? What does a good letter have? Is it being friendly? Is that a good letter? Think about that yourself. We could probably say that the most important element of writing a good letter is your ability to identify and write to your audience. Being able to know who your audience is, and you're conveying the right message to the right person with the right method. And if you do that, you get the right result. So if you are addressing your letter to the HR department, you would probably use words that are suitable to HR rather than highly technical terms that perhaps only engineers would understand. Even if your letter is addressed to an engineering company, chances are that the people in HR may not have an engineering background. So this point means carefully select the types of words and the language that you use when you're writing your letter. This is the element, one of the main elements of a good letter. We shall go through many, many other different elements as well. But this perhaps is the key. This will unlock the door as to how you begin to word and frame and design your letter. So remember, speak the language of the listener. Write the language of the reader. That is a very important point. When you write the language of the reader, then you are going to be sure of getting your message directly to them. You're not going to miss out at all on them being able to pick up on what you're saying, because you have spoken or written in their terms, in their language. This is also a very good thing for you too, because it highlights your professionalism. It means that you are not being condescending or superior or non-thinking about the person who's going to open that letter, the person who's going to read it. So in many ways you are being very considerate, because you want to make sure that your letter is not wasted, that your letter is a very valuable piece of information that that reader is going to regard very closely. So write the language of the reader. The next most important element is that when you are presenting the ideas or the concepts or the objective in your letter, then you make sure that you present it very clearly and concisely. That means that you don't need to ramble on for lots and lots of pages about what you're trying to say. You need to make it compact. You need to bring it down to a very good size where it gets the message across simply and purely and clearly. Try to be specific. Don't be vague. This is important too. People will not have a lot of patience if you are vague. This is a very true thing. Nowadays, people tend to skim letters rather than spend a lot of time sitting down and going through a letter that's full of lots and lots of words and is very unclear. You know that yourself, don't you? If you receive something in the mail, email or formal mail, we say snail mail, if you receive something in the mail, you only have a limited amount of time to sit down and go through the contents. And if you find, and this is true of myself as well, if I find that the details are vague and I have to guess what the subject is or what the actual idea is behind the letter, I don't really want to continue. I would rather just look for the main points rather than having to read through a whole lot of narration that really doesn't have any influence on what the objective is. So my point here is, don't be vague. Be very clear. If you're vague, people will not go through the letter and spend the time to do it. Think of yourself in this situation. You're a busy manager, aren't you? You're a busy executive. And therefore, every minute of your time is very valuable. And you don't like to waste time. Is that right? I'm sure it is. So, if you get something that's vague and too long and unclear, then you're more inclined not to read that. And you think it's wasting your time. So, the main thing in this element is get to the point. Don't go through all the unnecessary details that make it a very long process for the reader to read. And always, and perhaps this is one of the most important elements, is to remain professional. Professional is a very key word in your business, in the way you handle yourself, indeed in the way you, as a manager or an executive of a company, should work and behave. So professional should be perhaps on the top of the list of your vocabulary as to how you think about yourselves. Are you professional or are you not? Is it important to be professional? So in letter writing, remaining professional is absolutely necessary because why? What do you think? Well, the answer to that is remaining professional is important because you are putting words in writing, and writing is something that people can see and collect and record and bring out to remember. Therefore, you are putting on paper in black ink or blue ink or whatever it is what you are saying, and it is very physical and very visible. People keep things that are written. So even if you are writing a complaint letter, for example, then always remain polite and courteous, because you are writing on behalf of your company. Do not forget that point. So you would simply state the problems along with other information and be sure to avoid threatening language or slander. Slander is language that can reflect very badly on the reputation of your company. You may make false statements about the other party. So do be careful here. So here, always remain polite. It doesn't hurt to remain polite. You have to bite your tongue. For example, if you speak in a rushed way or impolitely to someone else in verbal communication. So here the same thing applies. When you're writing, slow down, step back, review, reread, and always make sure you are polite and courteous at all times. That will raise up your level of being courteous to the other party and your level of professionalism. Do you have trouble in this in your letter writing? Are you not sure if you're courteous, or do you think it might sound a little bit hard or impolite? We'll talk about these things in more detail later on. And always remember, when you're trying to frame and write a letter, do try to get feedback from a colleague if you are not sure. There's always that alternative. So our main points and main elements so far are the purpose of your letter. Make sure you know the purpose. There are different types of letters, as I said. And also be able to identify your audience and write to them in their language. Be clear and concise about your objective. Don't ramble on for hours on end. Get to the point. And as I just said here, remain professional at all times. In this slide, we have an example of a business letter. This is a sample which can show you the elements of a business letter. We can see that there is the letterhead at the top. Everybody in any company has stationery at their fingertips to use when they write letters. Each company, of course, has a letterhead that is designed specifically to put their company name, contact details, etc., usually at the top of the letterhead. Here we have one for your example. So we can see the letterhead or typed heading. Normally in a business letter, the format would be that on the right-hand side you will put the date. These things do vary from time to time and on the personal liking of the writer. So we'll go through a few tips as to how to set up your letter. But in this general sample, we'll be just talking, as we see here, about this general letter. Next up, we see the inside address. This is the address of the person you're writing to. And normally it's got the name at the top, his position, the name of the company, and the address. That is the usual positioning of this information. Then underneath we have what we call the salutation. Here you would normally write, Dear Mr. Smith, Dear Madam Smith, Dear so-and-so. This is called the salutation. Then we find we have the text of the body. This is the main part of the letter. And as you can see, it's broken up into paragraphs. We have the introduction, the main body, which is what you're talking about in your letter, and then your summing up of what your objective is. And finally, your closing. We will go through those a little bit later. Then we have your signature. Sometimes this is on the right or on the left, depending on your preference. Anyway, just take a note of this general sample for your information. Before you sign off, you usually put a complimentary closing. You would say sincerely or very best regards or kind regards, etc., depending on your preference. So your signature then follows, and then your type name and your position. Also, some companies or most companies should put a code which marks who wrote the letter, so it's recorded in your system of things. And this is usually done as a matter of routine. So there you see it, just a basic, general format of a business letter. So how do you go with writing business letters? Do you find it easy? Let's see, and we'll help you along the way, as I said earlier at the opening of this program. Now, don't forget that writing letters is not only on stationery, on your formal stationery, but business writing also comes into when you write an email. Don't forget, writing letters via email is just as important or has the same kind of effect as writing letters on formal stationery. You have to follow the rules. Just because it's email doesn't mean that it's casual. This is something very important to remember, and I did highlight this, or I have highlighted this point very particularly in email etiquette. But there are a few variations to the formal style when you're writing via email. For example, a heading is not really necessary in an email because you have your return address and their address and the date already. That is already in the system of email writing. So a heading is not really necessary. You do need to use a descriptive subject line. This is important. So in your subject field, you do need to highlight specifically the nature of your letter or the content of your letter. This is an important point to remember. Avoid using an inappropriate or a silly email address. Make sure that your address is a professional sounding one. If you don't have a professional one, then register one. It's easy to do that online. This will raise the image of your letter and how people think about you. A business letter comes normally from a business sounding address. Isn't that right? Sure it is. If you get something from a yahoo.com address or 12345 .yahoo address, these sorts of addresses don't sound very professional, do they? So then when you're writing a business email, make sure that you've got a business-like sounding address. Always, in an email, keep formatting simple. And it is best in emails to keep everything flush or straight up to the left margin. This makes it just easier to read. It doesn't mean it's going to fall apart, so to speak, when the opener opens that email. So avoid using tabs and special formatting because otherwise it may fall apart. And remember, it may not look like the way you see it when you write it when the reader at the other end opens it up. Then that looks messy and you've destroyed what you thought was a good looking email and the other person thinks a little bit differently about you. So these 4 guidelines here about email letter writing are important to follow. They will help you if you follow them. Another set of guidelines to use is to keep it formal. Remember I said just because it's email instead of an actual formal hard copy doesn't mean that you can forget about formality. You are still representing your company, and therefore that's important that you remind yourself of this point. Don't forget to spell check and use proper grammar as well. This is also part of the formality of your business email. And there are plenty of software tools here that can help you. So find the right one. Find one that is really quick and easy and you understand, and use it to keep the letter formal. Also, another general guideline is to try to keep the letters less than 80 characters wide. This makes it quite good looking. It doesn't mean that it's too long and the reader has to read all across the screen. Sometimes the reader at the other end, the software at the other end, will create breaks in the lines. So you will end up, instead of 10 lines, you will have 20 lines because the software at the other end wasn't able to read it properly and it broke up the lines into more than you needed. Another point, which is a good point to follow too, in business email writing. If possible, avoid attachments unless the recipient is waiting for it or knows that you're going to be sending an attachment. If it is a text document, and perhaps it's not too long, you can simply cut and paste the text below your letter and strip off any special formatting. That is, of course, if it is not too long. This is just a simple point to remember. It makes it so much easier for the receiver. Sometimes you can, if you wish, send a covering email and then attach your formal letter by way of putting your letterhead in an attachment, in an attached file, and writing in a formal way using your letterhead electronically on an attached letter. This can work, although be mindful of the fact that the reader may not have time to go through opening up all sorts of attachments. So it would be preferable to use your main part of your email as the place where to write the contents of your letter. And finally, if the person's name is unknown, address the letter to the person's title. Dear Director of Human Resources, for example. However, in this modern day and age, it is a good thing to try to seek out the name of the person you're writing to. If you have got time to do that, or you've got somebody, your assistant, who can help you do that, that's always a better thing to do. However, it's not too impolite if you do address it that way. People do understand these things. So we've come to the end of these simple guidelines when you're writing business emails. And the main point about business emails is always tell yourself, just because it's email doesn't mean it's casual. Please do remember this and focus on that point. So we also have here another example of the block format in a business letter, where everything is up against the left-hand side. Some people like the look of this. Some people think that it's okay, it's very pleasing, quite appealing and easy to read. The other example we looked at was where things were centered and more traditional. But here we have the block format. It is the simplest format, and many people do prefer it. You could try it and see how you feel about using this. The points are there for you to see. The date, the address, the name, Mr., Mrs., Ms., Dr., full name of the recipient, title and position, company name, address, etc., then the salutation. Dear Miss, dear Mrs., dear Mr., and the last name. Then we have the subject. What is this letter about? It could be coming promotions, or it could be January's training, etc. Just highlight that there. Then you have the body of your email. You have your closing, which you also have in your traditional letter format. You have your signature, your name printed, and your title. Then you would add any enclosures that you've got, the titles of those enclosures, and then the typist's initials, where this is your coding or your recording, so you can keep things in the system of your company files. Sometimes also you might like to put CC as well if you're copying somebody. And so that is something that you can add above your enclosures. So we've seen traditional letter format and the block letter format, which is all flush to the left. Do remember not flush it to the right, okay? That just doesn't make sense. So keep things to the left if you wish to use this particular style of formatting. So let's go through each item on the business letter format. So everything can be very clear to you. We can see, first of all, your address. This is not really needed if your letter has on the top of it the company letterhead printed very, very clearly with the name and the address, etc. Most company letterheads already have this, so you don't need to add that in. The return address of the sender of the letter is so that the recipient, the person who receives your letter, can easily find out where to send a reply. So you need to skip a line between your address and the date as well. So this is the address part of the actual format of the letter. So between your address and the date, you can skip a line. Next we come to the date. So you can put the date on which the letter was written into the month, day, year, August 30, 2009, for example. Some people change it around. They put the day, then the month, then the year. That is entirely up to you. So it certainly is a matter of choice here. It is nice to see the month written. If you use all numbers, that's okay as well, but it is nice to see the month written because then it's very, very clear. That's just a point to remember. Clarity is what you are looking for, so there's no mistake. Sometimes when you're writing a month, you could get mixed up in the numbers. So I would suggest that you use writing the actual month itself. January, February, August, write it in words. So skip a line between the date and the inside address. Some people make it quite a large space, perhaps 3 or 4 lines after the date. Then we come to the inside address. This is the address of the person that you are writing to, along with the name of that person. So you have your address at the top, unless it's printed in letterhead format, the date, and then the address of the person you're writing to. So you would write their name. Make sure you get their title very correct and that there's no mistake. If you are not sure, then ring their office. Have someone ring their office. Check their name cards. Check the last correspondence to ensure that you're entering every detail correctly. So their name is correct, their title must be correct, and the company name. Don't misspell anything. And as I said, if you need to go back and check up on this, then do that. If you're not sure who it should be addressed to, then you might leave it blank, but try to put in at least a title. For example, Director of Human Resources. And later you might just address the letter Dear Sir, or Dear Madam, or Dear Miss. That is, of course, if you aren't able to find out the name. But my choice is try to find out the name if you can. It's much more professional. And therefore, after you enter the inside address, as we have stated here, then you can skip a line between the date and the salutation, or the inside address and the salutation. Number 4. This is the salutation. And the salutation is very, very important in a letter. Be very mindful that a person will think about who you are and the style of person you are simply by the way you use this part of the letter and how you refer to them. Normally, we would start a letter with Dear, Dear Ms, and the name, Dear Mrs, Dear Mr, and the name, the last name, or Dear Director of whatever department it is, or Dear Doctor also. That is another title that we can use, or Dear Professor. So there are lots of titles. So do remember that you at first introduce it with the word dear. Now, normally, you have to make sure when you're speaking to international customers, you do tend to use the surname rather than the first name. For example, my name is Christina Dodd. If people are addressing a letter to me, they would say, Dear Mrs. Dodd. They would not really say, Dear Mrs. Christina. In formal addressing, we usually use a title and the surname or the family name. It could be if you also are writing a general kind of letter and you don't know the name of the recipient, and it's quite okay to go ahead and write this letter because no one's going to take offense, then you could write to whom it may concern. This is very acceptable. This is usual practice, and it is not offensive or impolite in any way. And please note that there is a colon after the salutation. So you can then skip a line between the salutation and the subject or the body of your letter. So we've now come through the salutation and now we are at the subject line. Some people put reference here as well. They use the word reference. You can use this, or you may choose not to use this particular line. But just think about it. It does make it easier for you to see what the letter is all about rather than reading right through it. It is actually a good thing to do, a very professional thing to do. Then you would skip a line between the subject line and the body of your letter. So, now your letter is starting to take shape. Now you know the beginning parts in which to use your addresses right through to the subject line and the content of your letter. Next we come to part 6, which describes the body. This is the body of your whole letter. And this is where you use paragraphs. And paragraphs actually should be single-spaced with a skipped line between each paragraph. Don't make it double spacing between each paragraph. I have seen that, and it makes the letter long, and then you go over more than the necessary number of pages. So just keep it simple to between paragraphs, one space. Then when you come to the end of perhaps the 4 or 5 paragraphs you have written, you would skip a line, making it one space between the body and the closing. The closing is very, very important. It's an important part of your letter. And this is where you let the reader know that you're finishing up and that you're signing off. And it usually ends with a sincerely or sincerely yours, or a thank you, and other things that can go here in this place, depending on the nature of your relationship with your customer or your client or your business partner. To be formal and to be correct all the time, sincerely or sincerely yours is very, very acceptable, and you won't go wrong with that. You can also say thank you for your kind attention in trying to resolve this matter. Sincerely yours, blah, 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 blah. You can add just a brief thank you on here for your time, etc. So note that there is a comma after the end of the closing, and only the first word in the closing is capitalized. These are some general rules to follow. And then you would skip 3 to 4 lines, 3 to 4 spaces, or enter spaces on your computer between the closing and then your printed name, so that you've got enough space in there to put your signature. Sometimes in electronic letters, people put their signatures there, but if you're writing on a standard paper, hard copy format, then also you make sure that you've got space for your signature. Some people have very large signatures, therefore they need a lot of space, but try to keep it to a comfortable and a standard 3 to 4 lines of space. Part number 8 of the format is your signature. And usually when you're signing your letters in the hard version, then you would sign in black or blue ink, black or blue biro. Normally green or red or any other colour is not acceptable, and it's not the standard way of signing off a letter. And point number 10, your printed name. This printed version of your name comes with your title or position on the line underneath your signature. So you have your name, your title under there. Then that ties off your signature. So people who cannot really read your signature, and most signatures are not able to be read these days, people will know who you are, and the signature is the formality of signing off. Once you have put your printed name there and your position, then you can skip a line. You can go down 1 space or even 2, and you go to the enclosure, etc. Coming up to point number 10, where you have your enclosures, as I mentioned to you, if you do have other documents that you want to attach, other than the letter itself, then you would include the word enclosure. Some people say attachments, but enclosure is fine. So if there is more than one, you would also type enclosures, how many there are, so that people can just check to make sure that they're there, that they're all there. And then you would highlight the number being the number of the other documents enclosed, and that does not include the letter itself. So you could say enclosure 1, proposed product range, enclosure 2, proposed price range, things like that. So it's quite clear what the enclosures are. Finally, we come to part number 11, which is the reference initials. If somebody else, your secretary or somebody that you have delegated to write this letter, writes it, then you would include your initials in capital letters, followed by the writer's initials in lowercase. Normally in the following format. AG could be Andrew Gillespie, for example, / GS could be the typist's name or initials of the typist's name. Or you can write it AG:GS. This is actually a good way of keeping some accountability in terms of your letters that you're sending out to your business contacts or business partners. It's a very formal way of just making sure things are recorded and logged professionally as well. If no one else has written this letter for you, then you don't need to put this in. You have written the letter yourself, and that's quite evident. You've signed it off. So there we have the different parts of your letter. And let's take a look here at a sample letter that shows you the style and the usage of these points from 1 through to 11. This is your address at the top, the date, and then you are addressing it to Miss Betty Johnson. Her section and her company and address, then you would put Dear Ms. Johnson. Here, the subject or reference entry is not necessary, or it hasn't been made. It's a matter of choice. There we have the introduction paragraph. We have 2 other paragraphs which highlight the body of this letter and what it's about. And then we have the sign-off. Sincerely, the signature, name and title. There are no enclosures, and this is just a very simple, straightforward letter. This is a letter actually talking about late payment of invoices. It's mentioning that the company wants to encourage customers to pay for their invoices before the due date. And here they are trying to offer a second promotion in order to encourage their customers to pay. It's a very polite follow-up letter about late payment. It's also praising the customer, saying that they're one of the biggest customers that they have and would appreciate you to continue providing custom to this company. It's signing off very nicely, saying if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me at such and such a number. Sincerely. So this is just a sample of a letter going out to a customer who has not paid for services. Did you notice that it has remained polite? As I said in the introduction of this first part of our program on business letter writing, one of the main elements is to remain polite. And this letter, even though it's asking for payment, has remained polite. It could be the first or initial letter in a series of letters depending on the seriousness of this particular case. But anyway, there you are. A sample of a business letter using all the components that we have described, and this is there for you to see and for you to start looking at the way you are going to set out your business letters from now on, and how you can make them look a little bit more professional and indeed sound a little bit more professional as well. So there are some principles that you need to keep in mind when writing business letters. Business writing is different. It's not like you're writing for a friend or to a friend. It's not like you're writing something that you wrote in university, like your thesis. It's not like you're writing about social sciences, etc., or that you're writing a political argument and a debate subject. Business writing is very different, and it is meant to be very crisp, we say, which means very clear, very well defined, rather than being too creative or evoking emotions in other people. It's meant to be specific, and being specific means that it's meant to be very accurate. There is no room really for mistakes when you're writing a business letter. You have to thoroughly check things out. It doesn't mean that business writing is superior or inferior, indeed, to other styles. It means that it is there for a unique purpose. And the purpose is business. The purpose is commercial. And so you need to consider these things when you're writing in a business context. So it is different. It's not your usual way of writing letters. So you have to think harder. You have to be more careful. As I did say, you do have to remember that your reader may not have a lot of time to read your letter. They have limitations, just like you have limitations with your time, and therefore they're likely to skim or glance at information. They are looking for what is going to affect them. What are the main points? What is relevant to them? They want to know, as we say in English, the bottom line, meaning what's the point? What's the main message? What are you trying to tell me? What point are you making about the situation or the problem, and how should they respond? This is quite simple to understand. So this is a very important principle to keep in mind. Business letters are different to others, and therefore you need to regard them and consider every element of them. Sometimes there are variations in style. Style can be different for legal letters, for more formal letters, in contracts, for example. You have to find a style that is between very formal legal kind of situations, and memos or emails or other letters, the majority of other letters, which are in some ways softer in their style. So you have to find the difference. Find an appropriate style. If you are too formal, then you can alienate readers. You can really switch them off, and they may not really want to read any further. Or an attempt to be very, very casual and too friendly may come across as being a little bit insincere in business. So here you have two extremes. Too formal, that can turn your reader off, or too casual and friendly, that can also turn your reader off. So in business writing, this means you must know your audience, just as you have to know your audience when you are speaking to them face to face or on the telephone. Do remember that in most cases, your business letter will be the very first impression that you make on someone. You may not have the opportunity to meet them face to face or on the telephone. And this is in most cases. How can you meet everybody that you're marketing to in a very face-to-face situation? You can't. It's impossible. And so therefore, the way that you write your letter is going to make a very important first impression. So even though we have become a little bit less formal over the last few years or 10 years or so in business letter writing, you should still take great care to make that you are formal enough to please the reader, and that the content itself is very, very clear. And the way to do this is to always proofread it very, very carefully. Now, this doesn't happen a lot. I see many, many mistakes in letters, and I'm sure you do too. So proofreading is a very important element to making sure the letter before you send it off has no mistakes in it. No mistakes in any format. The way you've formatted it, the content, the meaning, all the contents in your main body, the way you sign off your name, etc. Proofreading is absolutely essential to a final, beautiful finished product. Let's take a look at proofreading a little bit closer. Can you count the number of times F occurs in the following sentence? Just give yourself this quick quiz. How many can you see? Take a while to read it. How many did you see? Most readers, or good readers, see only 3, whereas there are actually 6. Sometimes we are skimming, or we just go over words that are small words and we don't tend to regard them. So in this case, people were perhaps not looking at the of and lost the F's off the of. So they saw the other 3. They missed the 3 ofs. Why? The answer is because we do tend to be casual with reading. We've written it, we've thought about it, and so we think it's done correctly. We skim read much of the time. We look over things and we take short words for granted. We think that they are okay, there's no mistake in them. So we give less attention to short words and more attention to longer words. If there are other words there too, we give longer attention to them. So the shorter words we tend to look over. This is why. It could also be that maybe you're a little bit lazy, you think someone else will do it, or you don't have time and you think it's fine, as I said. This is a mistake that you will make. There is a clear lesson here about the need for proofreading our documents. So make sure that you take time. And remember that editing is not proofreading. Editing is mainly about improving on the writing style or the content, or shortening the writing or lengthening it perhaps to include some other point. Editing is about making sure the meaning is clear. So you should have edited already. You should have ensured that all the contents are there and all the contents is correct. Proofreading is more about checking the typing, checking the layout, checking the spacing. Did you leave spaces, or has it all gone up without any space between paragraphs? You have to make sure you've got spacing there. Proofreading is more about the fonts, about the different typeface. Some people use that expression as well, that you use. Have you used all the same typeface? Or have you mixed them up? It could be too that you've used different sizes of your fonts as well. This sometimes is a mistake if you're not careful, or you're tapping away at your keyboard and you press a key by mistake, or you forget to change the fonts. So proofreading is about the mistakes, the spellers, whether there's too many capitals, whether you've underlined something and you shouldn't. And sometimes if you ignore dedicating time to proofreading, then that may cost you dearly in the end, because it will have an impact on the message you're trying to convey about the professionalism of your company. Remember, the reader at the other end, when they're reading your letter, they will spot the mistake more easily than you. So this will have an impact on them, and they will come to regard you and think about your image purely because of the fact that you've proofread your document or you have not proofread it. So take a while, and if you don't have the time, as I said, get someone else to proofread it. Ask them, your assistant, to proofread your letter if it's not of a confidential nature. So this part of our program is the very important beginning of how to approach business letter writing, looking at the structuring of a standard formal business letter, what goes into formatting that business letter, and the important elements behind your content, your purpose, and of course, proofreading that document so that you don't have any mistakes going out and that your image will always be kept at a very professional level. Thank you for your attention in this session, and I hope these guidelines are beginning to help you understand the very major importance of business letter writing and how you can improve on the way you write business letters. Thank you for your attention.